March 28, 2003. Los Angeles, California. Staples Center, 1111 South Figueroa Street. The building holds 18,997 people, and on this Friday evening in late March, essentially all of them are present, which is standard for this franchise, standard for this building, standard for a team that has won 3 consecutive NBA championships and is positioned to contend for a 4th. What is not standard is the particular quality of the attention the crowd is bringing to this night, the specific frequency of noise and anticipation that the arena has been generating since the doors opened, the awareness that what is about to happen is something more than a regular season game between the Western Conference's second-best team and a Washington Wizards outfit sitting 4 games below 500 with 3 weeks left in the schedule. What is about to happen is the last time Michael Jordan will play in this building. It is the second-to-last road game of what Jordan has announced is his final season, the conclusion of a second comeback that had brought him back from retirement in 2001 at the age of 38, back onto an NBA floor in a different uniform, wearing a different number, playing for a franchise that was not the one that had defined him. As a player whose knees had accumulated 2 decades of professional basketball and were telling him daily what 2 decades of professional basketball costs. He had averaged 22.9 points per game in that first Wizard season, missing 22 games with a knee that required management rather than the complete neglect that Jordan had subjected it to for the preceding 15 years. He was doing what everyone who played as long and as hard as he had played eventually had to do, which was negotiate with the machine rather than simply run it at maximum capacity. The machine was still remarkable. It was just no longer the same machine. The crowd at Staples Center knew all of this. The crowd also knew who the Lakers had waiting on the other side of the scorer's table, which was Kobe Bryant, 24 years old, 6 feet 6 inches and 212 pounds, in the middle of a season in which he was averaging 30 points per game for the first time in his career, leading a team that also contained Shaquille O'Neal and was being coached by Phil Jackson with the triangle offense that Jordan himself had operated within for the three-peat of the 1990s, operating in a system built on a philosophy that Jordan had helped prove. Bryant, in the 2002-03 season, was what Jordan had been in the years just before the championships arrived, a transcendent individual talent, playing within a system that elevated everyone around him, accumulating the statistical record of a player at the height of his powers. 30 points per game, 6.9 rebounds, 5.9 assists, 2.2 steals, all 82 games played for the first time in his career, all NBA first team, all defensive first team, third in MVP voting. He was averaging more three-pointers in a season than any Laker had before him. The comparisons to Jordan had followed him since before he was drafted, since he arrived from Lower Merion High School in the suburbs of Philadelphia at 17 years old, and began his career in a league that Jordan had spent 12 seasons defining, and Bryant had neither denied the comparisons nor been destroyed by them, but had done something stranger and more interesting, which was pursue them. The comparisons were not a burden for Bryant. They were a destination. Jordan had come back because Jordan was Jordan. The second retirement in 1999 had lasted 2 years and had broken under the weight of the competitive engine that had no legitimate outlet once the basketball stopped. And in the fall of 2001, he had returned in a different uniform for a franchise that had no championship infrastructure to play the game on whatever terms the body permitted. He had averaged 22.9 points per game in that first Wizards season, which would have been all-star numbers for most players at any age, and were all-star numbers for a man of 38 who had not played professional basketball in nearly 3 years. The knees required management now, rather than the complete neglect that Jordan had subjected them to for 15 years, and the management involved negotiation, playing within a ceiling that moved lower as the season progressed, finding the possessions where the body's available output was sufficient to the competitive task. He was still Jordan. The machine was just no longer the same machine. "What you get from me is from him," Bryant had said about Jordan. He had watched Jordan's home videos as a teenager, according to people who knew him from those years. His teammate Tracy McGrady, who had grown up with Bryant, described how the young Kobe would always be watching Jordan's tapes, absorbing the catalog of moves and footwork and competitive behavior that Jordan had accumulated across a decade of dominance, the way a musician absorbs a predecessor by living inside their recordings rather than just listening to them. Bryant had studied the footwork and the fadeaway and the competitive architecture that Jordan had built, the system of attention and preparation and discomfort-seeking that separated Jordan from players who had comparable physical gifts but not comparable results. Jordan had seen it from close range. At the 1998 All-Star Game in New York, Bryant's first, the 19-year-old had approached Jordan at midcourt after the game, with the specific deference of a student who understood the size of what was in front of him, and Jordan had acknowledged it in the way that great players acknowledge successors they can see clearly, not with the warmth of a teacher unconcerned about being surpassed, but with the respect of a competitor who recognized the competition. "I'll see you down the road," Jordan had told him. Magic Johnson, who witnessed that exchange from the arena floor, described it afterward as the moment he could feel the beginning of something forming between them, the start of a relationship that would define the succession of the sport's attention for the next decade. That was 1998. This was the road. Bryant had absorbed Jordan's syllabus through sustained observation and deliberate practice, and the specific obsession of someone who understood that imitation was not the same as capability, but that imitation was where capability began, that the student had to take the teacher's entire syllabus before he could write new chapters. He had taken the syllabus. He had been writing new chapters. The 3 championships with the Lakers, won alongside O'Neal in 2000, 2001, and 2002, were his proof of concept. 24 years old, and he had already done what Jordan had not done until he was 28. He had become the youngest player in history to win 3 championships, aged 23 at the end of the 2002 finals. In the 2001 postseason, he had averaged 29.4 points per game. In the 2002 finals against the New Jersey Nets, he had averaged 26.8 on 51.4% shooting. O'Neal himself, after that finals, had looked at his teammate and said what he saw, which was the best player in the league. These were not small things, they were the written chapters. On the night before the March 28th game, the referees assigned to work it, Mark Wunderlich, Gary Zielinski, and Bob Delaney, checked the roster sheets and understood what they were walking into. Officials at this level of the sport develop a feel for games that carry more weight than their place in the standings suggests. A recognition that emerges from years of proximity to the people and moments that determine what basketball means beyond the score. They looked at the names on the 2 rosters and felt what was available to be felt on a night when a great player was finishing and another great player was at the height of what he was becoming, and they were aware that this particular game was carrying a narrative weight that belonged to both of them. Bryant had been told something by Jordan earlier that season, the exact wording of which has been reported in slightly different versions across the years, but whose substance is consistent across all of them. The report, documented by multiple sources, was that Jordan had told Bryant something about his shoes, that Bryant could wear them but not fill them. The reporting on this is somewhat approximate, the way reporting on a private exchange between 2 competitive players often is, the precise grammar less certain than the underlying meaning, which was that Jordan, even in the closing act of his career, even at 40 years old on arthritic knees playing for a Washington franchise that was going nowhere, retained the competitive impulse to establish hierarchy in whatever room he occupied. He had been doing this since the 1984 draft. He had done it with players who had been better positioned to challenge him than Bryant at the time. He would not stop doing it on the way out the door. Bryant had not responded with words. The response he gave was the one available to players who understand that what happens on the floor is the only currency in this specific conversation, and the response required preparation rather than argument. He had not spoken to Jordan for approximately 2 weeks after receiving the remark, according to various accounts, and when the 2 teams' schedules brought them to the same building in late March 2003, Bryant had arrived at Staples Center with a week of film study and a morning conversation with Phil Jackson that had produced what Bryant described afterward as a green light. Normally, Bryant said, I would try to control the offense. But this morning, Phil gave me the green light offensively for tonight. Phil Jackson, who had watched Jordan operate at maximum capacity for 6 championships in Chicago, understood what a player receiving the green light could do with it when the competitive stakes were personal. He gave Kobe the floor and got out of the way. Jordan arrived at Staples Center with the 17 points he had scored in the first half of his mind. The residual clarity of a man who had played 40 years of competitive basketball in his body and understood that the knees and the mileage were setting the available ceiling, but that within that ceiling there remained something unchanged from the version of himself that had walked into Chicago Stadium in 1984 with a different set of joints and an identical fire. He had scored 17 of his 23 points in the first half that night, which was the Jordan version of giving it what he had, the honest application of the available capacity. He knew what was across the floor. He was not performing in comprehension of Bryant's abilities. He had been watching Bryant for 7 years and had told him at the 1998 All-Star Game, Bryant's first, when the 19-year-old had approached him at midcourt after the game, with the respect that students show teachers whose approval they need. "I'll see you down the road." That was 1998. This was the road. The game tipped at 7:30 in the evening, and in the first quarter, Bryant attacked the Washington Wizards defense with an aggression that the Wizards' game plan had not fully anticipated. The plan, as Wizards guard Jerry Stackhouse would explain afterward, was to keep Bryant on the perimeter, to force jump shots rather than allow drives, to prevent the close-range finishes that were the most efficient part of his offensive operation. The plan was reasonable. It was also the plan that every well-constructed defensive scheme tried against players whose scoring range included every zone of the floor, which is to say the plan assumed that the perimeter was a limitation and discovered that it was not. Bryant was shooting from beyond the arc that night at 69.2%. The perimeter was not where you put Kobe Bryant to make things easier. By the middle of the first quarter, Bryant had scored 20 points. The building, which had come prepared for a historic performance from the home side, was processing what it was watching with the specific attention of a crowd that is trying to determine how large the night is going to get. The referees on the floor that night had worked Jordan's games for years, had seen the defensive face that Bryant wore against the Wizards from close range. "We could see all the life going out of defenders after Kobe made a basket," one of them said later. "None of them would even look at Kobe after shots went in. They'd just run down to the other end." Bryant scored 30 of the Lakers' first 38 points. By the end of the half, he had 42. The first half ended with a Lakers lead, and Bryant in the midst of what the building was processing as something they would not see again, the full expression of a 24-year-old at the precise intersection of physical peak and competitive motivation, all the tools available simultaneously. The pull-up jumper, the drive and finish, the three-pointer that was landing with the consistency of a man who had practiced it for 8,000 mornings before the sun came up. He was not looking at the basket by the end of the first half in the way that players at the height of their accuracy sometimes stop looking, the way the motion becomes so rehearsed that the visual confirmation is almost supplementary, the shot going in because the body knows where the basket is before the eyes confirm it. He had scored 23 consecutive points for the Lakers at one stretch in the second quarter. The Wizards had tried everything the game plan prescribed, and several things the game plan had not anticipated. 42 points in the first half. The Wizards coach Doug Collins, who had coached Jordan himself in Chicago for 3 seasons in the late 80s, stood at the sideline watching it with the recognition of a man who had seen this before, but who understood that seeing it before did not make the current version easier to manage. Collins, who had watched Jordan score 40 and 50 and 59 points from that same sideline vantage a decade earlier, processed the first half with the specific honesty of a basketball person who could not allow himself to minimize what he was watching. "That was as good a shooting performance as I've ever seen," he said afterward. He shot 9 of 13 from the three-point line. "Our whole concern was, we thought we were going to get overwhelmed in the paint, and Kobe was magnificent. If he doesn't make those shots, those are terrible shots, but he made them. We ran into a player that was unstoppable tonight." The grammar of that last sentence contained the full resignation of a coach who had constructed a reasonable plan and watched it encounter an unreasonable opponent. Jackson, on the other side of the floor, let it continue. He had given Bryant the green light that morning, and what he was watching at halftime was not a player operating outside the available ceiling, but a player who had arrived at a night for which 2 weeks of preparation and 7 years of observation had been building. And the coach's job in such a situation was to stay out of the way of what was already in motion. "It shocked me," Bryant said afterward about being left in for a few extra minutes in the fourth quarter to reach 55. "I thought I was done. I'm getting too old for Phil to surprise me." The grin in that statement was the grin of a man who was not surprised at all, who understood that what had happened that evening had been recognized by everyone in the building, including the man who had seen Jordan do what Bryant was doing and had built both careers around the same philosophy, which was that the player who has the green light and the will to use it should be trusted to use it. Jordan watched from the other end of the floor with the attention of a man who was being shown something by someone who had studied him and was now demonstrating what the studying had produced. The Jordan who watched Kobe Bryant in the first half of March 28, 2003, was the Jordan who had looked at the 19-year-old at the 1998 All-Star Game and told him, "I'll see you down the road," the man who understood competition as a conversation conducted across time, one generation answering another, the student returning what the teacher gave. He had scored 17 of his own 23 points in the first half, had competed with everything the body was willing to give, and was watching the other end of the floor produce a performance that he himself had not duplicated in 6 years. The third quarter. Bryant with 42 points and a green light, and the crowd at Staples Center in the particular state that crowds enter when they are watching something historic in real time and are aware that they are watching it and want it to continue. Jordan with 23 minutes left in the last game he would ever play at this address, and the competitive intelligence of 15 professional seasons telling him that the only response available to the situation was to play. With 30.2 seconds left in the third quarter, the Lakers leading 87-67, and the game's outcome no longer genuinely in question, Bryant received the ball at the top of the key. The crowd recognized the isolation immediately. The crowd had been waiting for this all night, the direct confrontation between the man who had defined the preceding era and the man who had spent his entire professional life studying that definition and was now proposing to exceed it. Bryant cleared his teammates out with the gesture that means, "I have this." The same gesture Jordan had used in 1,000 late-game possessions in 1,000 arenas across 15 seasons. Jordan got his feet set. The Jordan defensive stance was legendary and deliberate, something the referees who had worked his games for years knew in their bodies as intimately as they knew their own. Weight back, hands active, the intelligence of a defender who was not trying to take the ball away in the first second, but to read the first move and respond to the second. Bryant started to drive. Jordan, who had taken offensive fouls in Dallas and New York and Philadelphia and Boston and in every building in the league across a career, stepped into position in front of Bryant's path with the timing of a man who had spent 15 seasons learning how drives begin and where defenders need to be when they end. He set himself and took the charge, going to the floor in the third quarter of what was the last time these two players would ever occupy the same basketball floor. The official called the foul. Offensive foul. Kobe Bryant. The crowd made the specific kind of noise that crowds make when something deeply correct has happened, when the architecture of the moment has been assembled properly by someone who understood all the materials available and used them with precision. Jordan on the floor, Bryant standing above him with the smile of a man who has just been caught being completely himself by someone who knew him well enough to predict it. Jordan, flat on his back in the paint at Staples Center, with 24-year-old Kobe Bryant above him and the building in full voice around them, looked up and said something. Actor John Cusack, sitting courtside, was close enough to hear it clearly and described it afterward in enough detail that what Jordan said has entered the documented record of this night. "Well, everybody in the building knew you weren't gonna pass." Bryant started laughing. Jordan stayed on the floor for a moment, and then they both laughed. And Tyrone Lue came over to help Jordan up, and Bryant put his hand out and helped him to his feet, and they walked down the court together laughing. The 24-year-old and the 40-year-old, the student and the teacher, the man who had defined everything and the man who had absorbed everything and was in the process of exceeding it. Bryant playfully mimed a few light punches in Jordan's direction before they separated, and the building, which had been watching this exchange as an audience watches the conclusion of a play it has understood from the beginning, received it with the noise of confirmation, the sound of a crowd that has gotten what it came for. The final score was 108-94. Bryant finished with 55 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists, and 3 steals, shooting 15 of 29 from the field and 9 of 13 from the three-point line, 16 of 18 from the free throw line. Jordan finished with 23 points and 4 assists. The 55 for Bryant was a number Jordan had not reached himself in 6 years. Shaquille O'Neal, who had watched the full performance from the same side of the floor as the young guard he had competed with and alongside for 7 seasons, said afterward what O'Neal said. "In every good karate flick, in order for the student to become the man, he has to kill the teacher." Nobody said it was death precisely, but something had concluded. Bryant left the court through the tunnel closest to the Lakers bench. Jordan walked off slowly toward the opposite end. There were no goodbyes. After the game, Wizards coach Collins said that Jordan had been aware of what he was watching from early in the first quarter. "He was hot," Jordan said of Bryant. "We tried to keep him on the perimeter. We went out on him and he was still hot. He kept them in the game in the first half." The grammar of this description is instructive. He kept them in the game, not the other way around. Jordan recognizing, in the language of a competitor who understood what he was seeing, that the game had been defined from one end of the floor by a player who had arrived that night with something specific to prove to someone specific, and had proved it in the only vocabulary that mattered between people like them. The relationship between these two men had been built across 7 years and 8 games, and many conversations in which Jordan served as both mentor and measuring stick for the younger player. Bryant had memorized Jordan's films. He had practiced Jordan's moves for years before adding them to his own operation. He had asked Jordan for advice, and Jordan had given it. The older player understanding that the obligation of the one who has walked a road is to describe it to the one who is coming, that this is how the best things in any craft survive, through transmission from someone who learned it by doing it to someone who wants to learn it for the same reason. Jordan had given Bryant what he had, and then, as competitors will, he had told him that what he gave was not everything, that there was a dimension of the shoes that the student could not fill. The student had spent 2 weeks not speaking to the teacher. Then he had spent a morning with Phil Jackson getting the green light. Then he had spent a game at Staples Center doing the thing that Jordan himself had done in every arena, in every city across 15 seasons, which was make the performance answer the question. 55 points, 9 three-pointers, 42 in the first half. And the charge in the third quarter, Jordan on the floor, and Bryant above him laughing, the two of them sharing the joke that both of them understood. The student had driven baseline in an isolation play with a 20-point lead in garbage time against a 40-year-old defender, and everybody in the building knew exactly what was coming. Because Bryant had spent his entire professional life watching this man and absorbing this man and becoming a version of this man that was built for a different era, and the one thing he had not been able to absorb, the one quality that was irreducibly his own, was the same quality Jordan had spent 15 seasons building, which was the competitive need to score rather than pass. That was so fundamental to his operating system that a crowd of 18,000 people could read it from their seats before the first step of the drive had been taken. Everybody in the building knew you weren't gonna pass. Jordan said it, and they both laughed because it was true. And because truth spoken between two people who understand the same thing is funny rather than cruel, and because the charge was not a defeat but a recognition, the older man using the last move available to him, the defensive charge that requires no leaping ability and no 40-inch vertical, and only the wisdom to get in position before the drive begins, to tell the younger man, I see you. I know what you are. I know what you were always going to do. And then Bryant helped him up off the floor and they walked down the court, and a fan in the crowd held a sign that read, Goodbye Michael, hello Kobe, and the building received it with the specific acceptance that buildings offer to true things that are also sad. Jordan would play his final NBA game 19 days later in Philadelphia, the city that had been his opponent in his first championship finals, completing a career across seasons with a quiet that the championships had not required. He did not return. Bryant would win 2 more championships over the next 7 years, the 5th one in 2010 against the Boston Celtics in 7 games, the one that matched the count he had been reaching towards since the night on the playground in Lower Merion, when he decided that Jordan 6 was the destination rather than the aspiration. He would never reach 6. What Bryant carried from Jordan into his own career was not a technique or a move or a system, but a way of understanding what the work required, the particular seriousness about preparation that Jordan had demonstrated and that Bryant had observed and internalized, the willingness to be available to your own capacity without reservation or comfort, the understanding that the talent is not the achievement, but only the starting condition, that what happens between the talent and the achievement is the part that separates the people who have the talent from the people who do the thing. He woke up at 3 in the morning to train. He studied film when no one was watching. He practiced the fadeaway until it was available when the defense was perfectly positioned and the game was on the line, and 45 points were not enough to cover the deficit, and he took it then the way Jordan had taken it, with the fullness of what he had made himself. On January 26, 2020, 17 years after the game at Staples Center, Kobe Bryant died in a helicopter crash in the hills above Calabasas with his daughter Gianna and 7 others. Jordan spoke at the memorial service at Staples Center 3 weeks later, in front of 20,000 people in the building, where Bryant had scored 55 points in the last game they ever shared. He said of Bryant, "When Kobe Bryant died, a piece of me died." He said that Bryant was like a little brother. He said he had not been able to stop crying. The charge in the third quarter on March 28, 2003, was the last competitive possession between them. Jordan on the floor, Bryant above him, both of them laughing at the truth of what had just happened, the way two people laugh when they have been exactly themselves in each other's company, and both of them know it. You couldn't fill them. He was still right. But the 55 points were also right, and the 9 threes, and the 42 in the first half. That is the thing about the shoes of the greatest player in the history of the sport. Nobody fills them. You can only make your own, from the same materials, at the same temperature, in the same furnace, and wear them until they are yours.